There is a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. You can be surrounded by people who love you, your husband at the dinner table, your kids in the next room, friends texting you all week long, and still feel like you're standing behind a pane of glass. Watching, present, but not quite reachable. Like everyone is speaking a language you used to know fluently, and somewhere along the way, you stopped being able to translate it back. If that's you right now, I want you to stop scrolling. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to explain something you've been carrying in silence for a very long time. That distance you feel? It isn't a malfunction. It isn't depression dressed up in spiritual language. It isn't you being difficult, or cold, or too much. What you are walking through has a name, and almost nobody warns the chosen ones about it before it hits. It's called the isolation stage. And I need you to understand something before we go one more sentence. It is not a punishment. It is a preparation. Let me tell you why. Think about a woman who is pregnant for the very first time. Somewhere around the 5th or 6th month, something happens that no one really prepares her for. She starts pulling inward. The parties feel loud. The small talk feels exhausting. She'd rather sit quietly by a window with her hand on her belly than be out in a crowd. People around her sometimes take it personally. You've changed, they say. You never want to do anything anymore. But she hasn't gotten cold. She's gotten focused. Something is forming inside her that requires her attention, her stillness, her protection. The world's noise has to shrink so the life inside her can grow. That's the isolation stage. And if you're in it, something is being formed in you too. Here's what most people miss. When God is about to do something significant through a person, He almost always takes them somewhere quiet first. Not because He's abandoning them, because He's about to say something they'll never hear over the noise of the crowd. Look at how many of them walked this exact road. Moses spent 40 years on the backside of a desert before the burning bush. 40 years. He went from being a prince in the most powerful house on earth's servants, influence, a seat at every important table, to a nobody watching sheep chew grass in the middle of nowhere. Can you imagine the loneliness of that? The man who was raised for greatness, now talking to himself and the wind, and a flock of animals who couldn't answer back. I promise you there were nights he thought his life was over, that God had forgotten him, that he'd been set aside and left to rot. But he wasn't being set aside. He was being emptied out. Every ounce of Egypt's arrogance, every reflex of leaning on his own strength, every bit of the man who once solved his problems with his own 2 fists, it all had to drain out of him in that silence. And when he finally came out of it, he came out carrying a staff that would split a sea. The desert wasn't the detour. The desert was the training. And here's what I need you to sit with for a second. Nobody was there to see it. There was no audience for those 40 years. No one clapping. No one confirming. No one saying, "Hang in there, Moses. This is going somewhere." Just him and God, and a silence so thick you could have leaned on it. That's the part nobody warns you about. The isolation stage is invisible to everyone but you and the one who called you. Let me bring this closer to home, because I don't want this to stay up on some mountaintop of ancient history. I want it in your kitchen, in your car, in the parking lot where you sit for an extra 10 minutes before you go inside, because you're not ready to put the face back on yet. Maybe you've noticed that conversations you used to enjoy now feel hollow. People are talking about the same things they've always talked about, the show everybody's watching. The drama at work, who said what, and something in you just can't pretend to care the way you used to. You're not being a snob. You're being reoriented. Your appetite is changing because your assignment is changing. Maybe you've noticed friendships quietly fading. Not with a fight. Not with some big blow-up. Just drifting. The invitations slow down. The group chat moves on without you, and you're left wondering what you did wrong. Let me tell you what you did. Nothing. You didn't do anything wrong. Some connections are seasonal, and God is not cruel for letting winter come to a friendship that already finished its purpose in your life. He's making room. You cannot carry everyone who started the journey with you into the place He's taking you next. Some people were assigned to a chapter, not the whole book. And I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like a nice thing people say to make loss feel holy. But stay with me, because there's a weight to this that goes deeper than comfort. Think about Joseph. Here's a young man who had a dream, an actual, God-given dream about his future, and the first thing that dream cost him was his whole world. His brothers, the people who were supposed to have his back, threw him in a pit and sold him like livestock. Then he lands in Egypt, does everything right, and gets thrown in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Alone, forgotten, he even helps a fellow prisoner, asks the man to remember him when he gets out, and the man walks free and forgets Joseph for 2 more years. 2 more years in the dark, after he'd already done everything right. Now think about what was happening in that cell that no one could see. That pit and that prison weren't the opposite of his dream. They were the road to it. The isolation was building a man who could hold power without being poisoned by it. Because when Joseph finally stood in front of Pharaoh, when he was finally given authority over an entire nation, he was unshakable. The isolation had made him unbreakable. You cannot break a man in the palace who already survived the pit. Do you see it? The very thing that felt like the destruction of his destiny was the manufacturing of it. So let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself. What if the season you're in, the one that feels like everything is thinning out, going quiet, falling away, what if that's not the ending of your story? What if it's the pit before the palace? What if God pulled you into the quiet because He's about to trust you with something He could never hand to the version of you that still needed the crowd's approval to feel okay? Because that's the real work happening in the isolation stage. Down underneath the loneliness, something is being cut away. Your need to be understood by everyone, your addiction to being liked, your habit of shrinking yourself to keep people comfortable, all of it is being loosened, one lonely night at a time. And here's what's really going on, the thing almost nobody says out loud. The isolation isn't just taking things away from you. It's teaching you to need one voice more than all the others. When the crowd is loud, you learn to listen to the crowd. When the phone is always buzzing, you learn to be led by whoever texted last. But when it all goes quiet, when the applause dies down, and the invitations stop, and you're left with just you and the ceiling at 2 in the morning, that's when you finally start to hear Him. Not the noise about Him. Elijah learned this. Here was a prophet who had just called down fire from heaven in front of an entire nation, the highest mountaintop moment you could imagine. And right after that, he collapsed, ran into the wilderness, sat under a tree, and asked God to just let him die. He was done, emptied, alone in a way that the victory couldn't touch. And what did God do? He didn't rebuke him. He didn't lecture him. He fed him, let him sleep, and then He drew him into a cave deeper into the isolation, and there, God passed by. Not in the wind that tore the mountains, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a low whisper, a still, small voice. Think about that. God waited until Elijah was completely alone, completely emptied, completely quiet, and then He spoke in the softest voice imaginable, because some things God will only say to you in a whisper, and you cannot hear a whisper in a crowd. That's why the isolation had to come. Not to hurt you, to bring you close enough to hear the whisper. And let me show you one more, because I think you'll recognize yourself in him. Gideon. When we meet him, he's hiding, threshing wheat down in a winepress, which is a strange place to thresh wheat, if you know anything about it. You're supposed to do that out in the open, up on a hill, where the wind can carry the chaff away. But Gideon was doing it in a pit, in secret, so the enemy wouldn't see him and take what little he had. That's a picture of a man who feels small, a man who's hiding his gift, doing it in the dark, convinced that the best he can hope for is to not get noticed. And an angel shows up and says the strangest thing to a man crouched in a hole. He says, "Mighty warrior." Gideon must have looked around to see who the angel was actually talking to. Mighty warrior? Him? He was the least, in the weakest family, from the smallest tribe, and he says as much, right to the angel's face. How can I save anybody? I'm the runt of a forgotten clan. But God didn't call him what he was. God called him what he was becoming. And notice God found him alone. In the pit. In the hiding place. That's where the calling came. Not in the crowd. Not in the temple. Not in some grand public moment. In the isolated, fearful, hidden place where Gideon thought no one was watching. Maybe you've been threshing your wheat in a winepress too. Doing the thing God gave you quietly, in the dark, hoping nobody notices, convinced you're the least likely person to carry anything significant. And maybe the isolation you're in is exactly where the words "mighty warrior" are about to find you. Now let me talk to you directly for a moment. Because if you've made it this far into this message, I don't think that's an accident. My name is George. I've spent years now walking alongside people in exactly the season you're in, the ones who feel marked in a way they can't explain. Who've always sensed there was something different about the way they see the world, who've carried a weight and a calling they never had words for. And I've watched the same pattern play out over and over again. The isolation stage comes. It shakes people. And most of them go through it completely blind, thinking something is wrong with them. When the truth is, something is right. Something is being born. That's exactly why the secret protocol exists. What you just experienced was not content. It was a mirror. And mirrors demand a decision. If you are ready to go to the root to finally understand why you think, feel, and perceive differently from everyone around you, the secret protocol carries the 7 keys that reveal what God placed inside you before you ever drew your first breath. Full audiobook included for every moment of your day, plus the awakening map. As a bonus, the 5 stages of spiritual awakening mapped with clarity, showing where you are right now and what the Spirit is releasing in this season. Link pinned in the first comment. Not for much longer. And you did not make it to the end without a reason. Because here's the thing about the isolation stage: it has a purpose, but it also has a map. And when you can see the map, everything changes. The loneliness stops feeling like being lost and starts feeling like being led. Let me show you what I mean. There's a difference between wandering and being led through the wilderness. The children of Israel wandered for 40 years, but even in their wandering, there was a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. They were never actually alone. They just couldn't always feel the presence that was right there in front of them. I think that's where a lot of chosen ones get stuck. Not in the isolation itself, but in the belief that the isolation means abandonment. And those are 2 completely different things. You can be isolated and still be accompanied. You can be alone in the eyes of the world and surrounded in the Spirit. The cloud is still there. The fire is still there. You've just been looking at the empty seats at your table, instead of the one sitting across from you in the quiet. Let me give you something practical to hold on to, because I don't ever want to leave you with only feelings. When the isolation hits hardest, watch what your mind wants to do with it. Your mind will want to build a story. It'll say, they left because you're unlovable. It'll say, you're alone because you're being punished. It'll say, everyone else has their people, and you're the only one out here in the cold. That story feels true because it's loud and it repeats. But loud is not the same as true. The truth is quieter. The truth says, I have been set apart, not cast aside. The truth says, this silence is an invitation, not an eviction. The truth says what's being formed in me right now can only be formed here, in the quiet, away from the crowd that would have talked me out of it. So when that loud story starts running in your head, I want you to do something simple. Don't argue with it. You can't outshout a lie by getting louder. That just makes more noise. And noise is the very thing this season is trying to strip out of you. Instead, get quiet on purpose. Sit down in the middle of the loneliness and say, out loud if you have to, God, what are you forming in me right here? And then wait. Not for a lightning bolt, for a whisper. The answer almost never comes the way you expect it. It comes soft and slow and personal, a single thought that settles you, a scripture that surfaces out of nowhere, a strange peace in a situation that has no business being peaceful. I've watched people do this and come out of a single quiet evening more changed than they were after months of chasing every voice and every crowd. Because the moment you stop fighting the silence and start questioning it, the silence stops being your enemy and becomes your teacher. Do you know how many times someone almost talked you out of your calling and you didn't even realize it was happening? A well-meaning friend who told you to be realistic. A family member who laughed off the thing burning in your chest. A voice that said, who do you think you are? Every time you reach toward the thing God put in you. Sometimes the isolation is God's mercy. He removes the voices that would have drowned out His before you were strong enough to know the difference. Think about Hannah for a moment. A woman who wanted one thing more than anything in the world, a child, and year after year, she watched it not come. And to make it worse, she was mocked for it, provoked, made to feel small in the very place that should have been her refuge. So what did she do? She went to the house of God, and she prayed, so intensely, so silently, pouring out her soul with no words coming out of her mouth, that the priest thought she was drunk. That's isolation, to be in that much pain, that much longing, and to have the people around you completely misread what you're going through. To be pouring your whole heart out to God and have the world look at you and see something entirely wrong. But God saw. God always sees what the crowd misreads. And out of that isolated, misunderstood, silent prayer came Samuel, a prophet who would anoint kings. Her private ache became a public turning point for an entire nation. But it had to go through the isolation first. It had to go through the season where no one understood, where she looked foolish to the people watching, where the only witness to her real heart was God Himself. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're carrying a longing that people keep misreading. Maybe they think you're being dramatic, or distant, or difficult, when the truth is you're pregnant with something you can't even fully explain yet. And the loneliness of not being understood is its own particular kind of pain, isn't it? It's one thing to be alone. It's another thing to be surrounded and still feel unseen. I want to say something to you now, gently, because I think you need to hear it. Being misunderstood is not proof that you're wrong. Some of the most anointed people who ever lived were the most misunderstood people of their time. Being different was never a defect in you. It was a deposit. And the isolation stage is simply the season where that deposit gets protected long enough to mature. Here's what I've watched happen, over and over. People fight the isolation. They try to fill it. They scroll for hours to numb it. They chase old friendships that already ran their course, trying to force warmth back into a season God has already closed. They pour themselves into being needed, into being busy, into being anywhere but alone with the silence. And in doing that, they miss the whole point of the season. Because the isolation stage isn't asking you to fill it. It's asking you to sit in it. To let it do its work. To stop running from the quiet long enough to hear what the quiet is trying to give you. I'm not telling you to isolate yourself, please hear me on that. I'm not telling you to push people away, or wall yourself off, or call your loneliness holy so you never have to deal with it. That's not this. Real isolation seasons are God-initiated, not self-inflicted. But when God brings the quiet, the worst thing you can do is spend the whole time trying to make noise again. David knew this. Before he ever wore a crown, he was a shepherd boy, the one his own father forgot to call in from the field when the prophet came to anoint the next king. Think about that. When Samuel came to the house looking for the future king of Israel, David wasn't even invited to the lineup. His own family overlooked him. He was out in the field with the sheep, alone, while everyone else got dressed up for the important moment. But those lonely fields were where David learned to worship with no one watching. They were where he faced a lion and a bear, with no audience to impress. They were where he wrote songs to God that we're still reading 3,000 years later. The isolation of those fields built the man who could face Goliath because he'd already faced impossible things in private, where nobody clapped. When the whole army was too afraid to move, one shepherd boy walked forward, and the reason he could is that the field had already made him brave. Alone, that's what the quiet is doing in you. So here's what I want to ask you to do, right now, wherever you are. Stop asking God to take the isolation away. Start asking Him what He's forming inside it. Those are two completely different prayers, and they lead to two completely different seasons. One keeps you fighting the wilderness. The other lets the wilderness finish its work, so you never have to come back through it again, because the goal was never to keep you in the desert. The goal was to get the desert out of you, the doubt, the need for approval, the version of you that would have crumbled under the weight of what's coming. And then to bring you out carrying something you could have never picked up in the crowd. I want you to notice something about every single person I've mentioned. Moses, Joseph, Elijah, Hannah, David. Not one of them stayed in the isolation. Every one of them came out. The desert ended. The prison door opened. The cave gave way to a whisper and then a mission. The years of longing gave birth to a prophet. The lonely field led to a throne. The isolation stage is a stage. Say that word again, a stage. It has a beginning and it has an end. It is a passage, not a permanent address. And the very fact that it feels so heavy right now might just mean you're closer to the end of it than you think. Sometimes the darkness gets thickest right before the dawn breaks it open. So don't you dare let go now. Don't you dare believe the story that says, this is all there is. You are not being buried. You are being planted. And there is a very big difference between the two, because when they bury something, they walk away from it. When they plant something, they come back for the harvest. And a seed doesn't look like much when it's under the ground. That's the hard part. There's a stretch of time after a seed goes into the soil where absolutely nothing looks like it's happening. From the surface, it's just dirt. Quiet, dark, still dirt. Anyone walking by would swear nothing is there. But underground, out of sight, the seed is breaking open. It's sending roots down before it ever sends a single leaf up. And that hidden underground work, the part nobody can see and nobody would applaud, is the part that decides whether the plant can survive the storms later. No roots, no fruit, and roots only ever grow in the dark. That's your isolation. That's the underground work. You feel like nothing is happening because you're looking at the surface. But down where only God can see, roots are going down deep enough to hold the weight of everything He's about to grow through you. Now I want to hear from you. And I want you to be specific because I read these, and I'm going to be looking for yours. Tell me one thing you've stopped being able to do since the isolation started. Maybe it's the small talk you can't stomach anymore. Maybe it's a friendship you can feel quietly fading. Maybe it's a room you used to love being in that now makes you want to leave the second you walk in. Name it. Write it down in one honest sentence in the comments, and then write these 3 words after it. But I'm listening. Because I want you to declare, right there in public, that you're no longer running from the quiet, you're finally letting it speak. I'll be reading. And I'll be praying over the ones I find. This channel is created without ads and without platform income. If these messages have touched your heart, strengthened your faith, or helped you during a difficult moment, and you'd like to support this work, you can use the CR code on your screen or the contribution link in the pinned comment. Thank you for walking this path with us.